I always believed funerals were where judgment stopped. Yet, right in the middle of my billionaire grandfather's service, my family mocked a homeless man as if he were cheap entertainment. They had no idea that just 3 hours later, the first name read in the will would not belong to a single one of them. From that precise second, our entire legacy began to fall apart. My name is Evelyn Green. I am 28 years old, and in my professional life as a risk analyst for Northwind Meridian Strategies, I spend my days calculating the probability of disaster. I look at spreadsheets, market trends, and human error to predict when a structure might collapse or when an investment might turn to ash. It is a job that requires a certain level of detachment, a clinical eye that sees the cracks in the foundation before the building actually falls. But as I stood in the shadowed rear nave of St. Jude's Cathedral, clutching a crumpled tissue that I had not actually used yet, I realized that no amount of professional training could have prepared me for the structural failure of my own family. The funeral of Arthur Green was not a ceremony of mourning. It was a corporate merger disguised as a religious sacrament. The cathedral was a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture, a cavernous space of stone and stained glass that smelled faintly of beeswax, incense, and the heavy, cloying scent of 3,000 white lilies. My grandfather had always hated lilies. He said they smelled like funeral parlors and bad decisions. Yet here they were, banking the altar in massive, suffocating drifts, chosen specifically by my mother because she had read in a magazine that white lilies were the appropriate floral arrangement for a billionaire's send-off. It did not matter what Arthur liked. It only mattered what Arthur represented. I stood alone near a pillar of cold gray stone, well behind the velvet ropes that cordoned off the first 5 rows. Those rows were reserved for the immediate family, a definition that technically included me but practically excluded anyone whose net worth did not meet a certain threshold. My mother, Beatrice, sat in the center of the front pew. Her posture was rigid, perfect, like a steel rod wrapped in Italian silk. She was wearing a black dress that I knew cost more than my car, and her head was bowed, not in prayer, but likely in a mental calculation of real estate values. Next to her sat my Uncle Julian, shifting his weight from side to side, the wood of the pew creaking under him. He had been checking his watch every 5 minutes since the service began. I could see the glint of the Rolex against his cuff. He wasn't checking the time because he had somewhere to be. He was checking it because he wanted this over with. They were all there. The cousins who had not visited grandfather in 10 years, but were now weeping into dry handkerchiefs. The business associates who were eyeing the competition across the aisle. The politicians who had come to pay respects to a donor rather than a friend. It was a sea of black wool and fake tears. I looked at the mahogany casket resting at the foot of the altar. It was closed. My grandfather had requested a closed casket. He had told me once, during one of our quiet Sundays on his porch, that he didn't want people staring at his empty shell while wondering how much gold was left in his teeth. "Money makes people funny, Evie," he had told me, his voice raspy from the cigars he wasn't supposed to smoke. "It strips away the polish. You give a man $1 million, you don't change him. You just give him the courage to be exactly who he always was." I tightened my grip on the pew in front of me. I missed him. The ache was a physical weight in my chest, a dull, throbbing pressure that made it hard to breathe, to everyone else. Arthur Green was the titan of industry, the man who built a shipping empire from a single tugboat. To me, he was just Grandpa. He was the man who taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 12 and how to fish for bass when I was 14. He was the only person in this entire cathedral who had ever looked at me and seen something other than a disappointment. I was the anomaly in the Green family. I didn't want the parties. I didn't want the board seat that Uncle Julian had promised to his son, a boy who couldn't spell dividend if his life depended on it. I wanted to work. I wanted to build something of my own. When I took the job at Northwind Meridian, my mother had stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks. She said a salary was something servants received. She said I was embarrassing the family name by punching a clock. "Evelyn," she had hissed at me earlier that morning when I arrived at the church entrance, "do try to stand in the back, and for heaven's sake, don't speak to the press. We don't need them asking why Arthur's granddaughter is driving a Honda. So I stood in the back. I was the ghost at the feast, watching the vultures circle. The priest was droning on about Arthur's generosity, his spirit, his contributions to the city. It was a generic speech, clearly written by a publicist and handed to the clergy 10 minutes before the service. The words floated over the heads of the congregation, landing on deaf ears. No one was listening to the eulogy. I watched the eyes of the people in the front rows. They weren't looking at the priest. They weren't looking at the cross. They weren't even looking at the casket. They were looking at Harrison Sterling. Sterling was grandfather's personal attorney and the executor of the estate. He sat in the second row, adjacent to the family, looking like a gargoyle carved from granite. He was 70 years old, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had a briefcase at his feet. That briefcase was the true center of gravity in the room. It contained the will. I could practically feel the hunger radiating from my mother and Uncle Julian. It was a palpable energy, a vibrating tension that sucked the air out of the massive room. They had spent the last 5 years waiting for this moment. They had endured grandfather's lectures, his eccentricities, and his long, rambling stories, all for the promise of what was in that briefcase. They had already spent the money in their heads. My mother was planning a renovation of the Hamptons estate. Uncle Julian was planning to pay off the gambling debts he thought no one knew about. My cousins were planning vacations to places I couldn't pronounce. It was disgusting. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling, trying to find some peace, some connection to the man we were supposed to be honoring, but the church felt cold. It felt like a bank vault. The silence between the priest's sentences wasn't the silence of reflection. It was the silence of a predator waiting to pounce. Arthur Green was a man of the people, the priest said, wrapping up his homily. He believed that every man, no matter his station, deserved dignity. My Uncle Julian stifled a cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. I saw my mother pinch his arm, not out of respect, but out of a need to maintain appearances. They didn't believe that. They believed dignity was something you bought, like a membership at the country club. I felt a sudden, intense urge to leave. I didn't belong here. I didn't belong with these people who shared my blood but not my heart. I wanted to go to the cemetery alone, after the circus had left town, and say goodbye to my grandfather properly. I wanted to tell him that I was okay, that I was safe, that I hadn't let the world break me yet. But I stayed. I stayed because I knew grandfather would have wanted me to see this. He would have wanted me to witness the final act of the play. Before we proceed to the cemetery, the priest announced, we will have a moment of silent prayer. The room fell into a hush. It was heavy, oppressive. The air was thick with expectation. I could hear the rustle of silk, the soft click of a heel on stone, the distant hum of traffic outside the thick stone walls. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the signal that the performance was over and the transaction could begin. I closed my eyes, trying to summon an image of grandfather's face. I pictured him the way he was last Christmas, sitting in his leather armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking at me with those sharp blue eyes. Watch them, Evie, he had whispered to me then. When I go, watch them. They'll show you who they are. Don't look away. I opened my eyes. I was watching. I saw the greed etched into the lines of my mother's neck. I saw the desperation in my uncle's fidgeting hands. I saw the hollowness of it all. And then, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a change in the air pressure, a draft of cold wind that swept through the nave, cutting through the scent of the lilies. The heavy silence was broken by a low grinding noise from the rear of the church. Heads turned, not just a few, but a ripple of movement that started at the back and worked its way forward. People were twisting in their pews, frowning, whispering. My mother turned her head slightly, annoyance flashing across her face at the interruption. I turned around. The massive oak doors at the main entrance of the cathedral, doors that were usually kept shut during the service to seal us off from the common world, were slowly groaning open. The daylight spilled in, harsh and bright, blinding after the dim amber glow of the interior. A silhouette stood in the opening. It was not a late arrival from the country club. It was not a dignitary. It was a figure that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The person hesitated at the threshold, framed by the bustling city street behind him, looking small against the grandeur of the archway. The doors finished opening with a resounding thud that echoed off the stone walls. The silence in the church shattered. A collective gasp. Then a murmur of confusion and indignation rose from the pews. I squinted against the backlight, trying to make out the details of the intruder. The figure took a step forward, crossing from the sunlight into the shadow of the church. My breath caught in my throat. This was not part of the script. This was not in the program. And as I looked at the backs of my family members, rigid with shock and rising anger, I knew that the calculated perfection of Arthur Green's funeral was about to be destroyed. The man who stepped out of the sunlight and into the conditioned air of the cathedral was a walking violation of the dress code. He was older, perhaps somewhere in his 60s, though the harshness of his life had carved deep gullies into his face that made him look ancient. He wore an oversized army jacket that had lost its buttons years ago, held together by a piece of fraying rope. His trousers were dark and stiff with grime, ending in a pair of mismatched sneakers that were splitting at the seams. He held a faded, grease-stained cap in his hands, wringing it with a nervousness that was painful to watch. As the heavy doors thudded shut behind him, the silence in the church shifted from expectant to appalled. The smell reached us before he did. It was the distinct, sour odor of unwashed clothes, damp cardboard, and stale alcohol. It drifted over the scent of the expensive lilies, an olfactory insult that made the woman in the fur coat 2 rows ahead of me press a perfumed handkerchief to her nose. He did not walk with the confidence of an intruder. He walked with a shuffle, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched as if he expected a blow to land at any moment. He took 3 tentative steps down the center aisle, his eyes fixed on the mahogany casket at the front. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, barely louder than a whisper, but in the acoustic perfection of the cathedral, it carried. "I am sorry to interrupt." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sheer audacity of his presence seemed to paralyze the room. Then, the spell broke. "Good God," my Uncle Julian said, his voice booming in the quiet. He didn't even bother to whisper. He stood up, smoothing the front of his bespoke Italian suit, his face twisting into a sneer of absolute disgust. "Is there no security in this place? How did this filth get past the gate?" The man froze. He looked up, his eyes darting around the sea of hostile faces. He looked terrified. "I just wanted to see him," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward the altar. "I just wanted to bow, to say goodbye to Arthur." The use of my grandfather's first name seemed to act as a physical slap to my mother. She spun around in her pew, her eyes narrowing into slits of ice. She didn't look at the man as a person. She looked at him as a stain on her perfect day, a smudge on the lens of the camera capturing her grief. "You will do no such thing," Beatrice snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "This is a private service for invited guests only. You are trespassing. Get out." "I knew him," the man said, his voice gaining a fraction of desperation. He took another step forward. "Please, just for a minute." A ripple of laughter moved through the cousins on my left. It wasn't a nervous laughter. It was the cruel, barking laughter of a pack of hyenas spotting a wounded animal. "He knew him," my cousin Preston chuckled, leaning over to whisper loudly to his sister. "Grandpa probably gave him $1 once to wash his windshield, and now he thinks they were best friends. Imagine the delusion." "Maybe he is here for the buffet," his sister whispered back, loud enough for half the church to hear. "Hey, old man, the soup kitchen is 3 blocks over. You took a wrong turn." The man flinched. He actually flinched, as if the words were stones thrown at his head. He stopped moving, shrinking into his coat. He looked at the floor, his hands twisting the cap so hard I thought the fabric would tear. "I am not hungry," the man said softly. "I am not here for money." That is exactly what a beggar would say, Uncle Julian announced. Stepping out into the aisle to block the man's path, Julian was a large man, fed on steak and scotch, and he towered over the intruder. Look at you. You are disgusting. You are dripping on the floor. Do you have any idea how much this ceremony costs? Do you have any idea who we are? Julian, don't get close to him, my mother warned, her voice dripping with disdain. You might catch something. Where is the verger? Where is the security detail? I paid $5,000 for privacy, and I intend to get it. The man looked up at Julian, and for a second, I saw his face clearly. It was a face of profound sadness, not aggression. There was a dignity there, buried under the dirt, fighting to breathe. I meant no disrespect, he said. Arthur, Mr. Green, he was a good man. Don't you dare speak his name, my mother hissed. She stood up now, a pillar of black rage. My father was a titan. He did not associate with street trash. You are soiling his memory just by being in this room. Leave now, or I will have you thrown out into the gutter where you belong. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just that they wanted him gone. It was that they were enjoying the power dynamic. They were enjoying the act of crushing someone so obviously beneath them. It was a sport, a way to vent the tension of the morning on a target that couldn't fight back. Maybe we should check his pockets before he leaves, another relative shouted from the back, emboldened by the family's stance. Make sure he didn't swipe a candlestick. More laughter, louder this time. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling, a cacophony of malice that drowned out the sacred silence of the church. Even the priest looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, but he said nothing. He knew who signed the donation checks. The man stood there, surrounded by the jeers of the wealthiest people in the city, and he looked utterly defeated. He lowered his head completely. I understand, he whispered. I understand. He turned to leave. As he turned, I saw it. I saw the look in his eyes before he averted his gaze. It was a look of deep, burning shame. It was the look of a man who has been told he is worthless so many times that he has begun to believe it. And in that split second, the memory hit me. I was 10 years old. I was sitting on the stairs of my grandfather's mansion, hidden by the banister. My grandfather was in the hallway, arguing with Uncle Julian and my mother. They were berating him for wearing an old fishing vest to a gala. They were telling him he looked like a gardener. They were telling him he was embarrassing the family. I remembered the look on Arthur Green's face. He hadn't been angry. He had looked ashamed. He had looked small, diminished by the very people he had raised. He had that same look in his eyes, the look of a man who realizes his heart matters less to his family than his appearance. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The injustice of it felt like a physical blow. They were doing it again. They were doing to this stranger exactly what they had done to my grandfather for years. They were judging the book by its cover, laughing at the binding while ignoring the story inside. I looked at the casket. Grandfather was in there. The man who taught me that character is what you do when no one is watching. If he could see this, if he could see his wife and children mocking a defenseless old man at his own funeral, he would have died of a broken heart all over again. The security guards finally materialized from the side entrance, 2 burly men in dark suits, moving with the aggressive purpose of bouncers. They headed straight for the old man, reaching out to grab his arms. Come on, pal, one of the guards grunted, reaching for the man's dirty collar. Let's go. Don't make this hard. The old man flinched away, terrified. I'm going, he said. I'm going. Not fast enough, Julian sneered. Drag him out. Something inside me snapped. It was a clean, sharp break from the fear that had kept me silent for 28 years. I felt the heat rise up my neck, burning through the cold conditioning of my upbringing. I didn't calculate the risk. I simply moved. I pushed past the velvet rope. My heels clicked loudly on the stone floor as I marched down the aisle, past the rows of stunned faces, past my mother, past Uncle Julian. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud. but it was steady. It cut through the laughter like a knife. The security guard paused, his hand inches from the old man's shoulder. He looked at me, confused. "Ma'am?" I said stop, I repeated, louder this time. I stepped between the guard and the homeless man. I turned my back to the altar and faced my family. I felt the blood pounding in my ears, but my hands, surprisingly, were not shaking. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was heavier than the silence before the service. This was the silence of shock. Evelyn Green, the quiet one, the mouse, the disappointment, was making a scene. "Evelyn," my mother said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low octave. "What do you think you are doing? Sit down, immediately." "No," I said. The word tasted foreign in my mouth, but delicious. "Have you lost your mind?" Uncle Julian stepped forward, his face red. "Get out of the way, Evelyn. Let them take the trash out so we can finish burying your grandfather." I looked at Julian, really looked at him. I saw the greed in his eyes, the arrogance, the complete lack of humanity, and then I looked at the old man behind me, who was trembling, clutching his cap to his chest. "This is a funeral," I said, my voice rising, trembling slightly with emotion but gaining strength with every word. "This is a place of worship, and you are behaving like bullies. You are laughing at a man who just wanted to pay his respects. Is this how you honor grandfather? By mocking the poor? By acting like the world belongs to you and everyone else is just dirt on your shoes?" "He is dirt," one of my cousins shouted from the back. "Look at him." "I am looking at him," I shot back, meeting my cousin's gaze until he looked away. "I am looking at a human being, which is more than I can say for the rest of you right now." I turned to the security guard. "Do not touch him. If you touch him, I will sue your company for assault. I am a member of this family, and I am telling you he stays." My mother looked like she was about to have a stroke. "Evelyn, you are humiliating us. You are ruining everything." "No, Mother," I said, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. "You ruined it the moment you opened your mouth." I turned to the old man. He was staring at me with wide, watery eyes, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. I softened my expression. I reached out and gently touched the sleeve of his dirty army jacket. It was damp and cold. "I am sorry," I told him, ignoring the collective gasp from the pews behind me. "I am so sorry for them. Please, don't leave." "Miss," he whispered, his voice shaking, "I don't want to cause trouble." "You are not the one causing trouble," I said firmly. I looked back at the casket one last time, feeling a sudden warmth in my chest, as if grandfather was standing right there beside me, nodding. I took the old man's arm. "Come with me." The walk from the center aisle to the heavy oak door of the sacristy felt less like a departure and more like a tactical retreat across a battlefield. I had my hand on the old man's elbow, guiding him, but I could feel the heat of 100 stares burning into my back. My family did not simply watch us leave. They vibrated with a collective, silent fury that was far more terrifying than their shouting. As we passed the front pew, my mother leaned out. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a line so thin it had almost vanished. She did not shout this time. She hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. "You have chosen your side, Evelyn," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Do not expect to sit with us at the reception. You have made yourself a stranger to this family today." I paused for a fraction of a second. I looked down at her, seeing the diamonds glistening at her throat and the complete lack of warmth in her eyes. "I think," I said quietly, "that I have been a stranger to this family for a long time. Mother." I did not wait for her response. I pushed through the side door, ushering the man into the small, quiet room that served as a waiting area for the clergy and grieving families. The door clicked shut, severing the connection between the suffocating tension of the sanctuary and the cool, dusty silence of the room. The roar of silence was sudden and absolute. The air here smelled of old books and lemon polish, a sharp contrast to the cloying lilies outside. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands, which had been steady during the confrontation, began to tremble. I looked at the man. He was standing in the center of the room, clutching his cap, looking around as if he expected the walls to collapse on him. Up close, the poverty was even more visceral. The army jacket was not just dirty, it was stained with the kind of grime that comes from sleeping on concrete. His skin was weathered, mapped with deep lines of exhaustion, and his eyes were watery and red-rimmed. "Please," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the small space. "Sit down, anywhere." He hesitated, looking at the velvet-upholstered chairs arranged against the wall. I shouldn't," he rasped. "I'm dirty. Miss, I'll soil the fabric." The statement broke my heart. Even in his distress, he was worried about the furniture. My Uncle Julian would have burned the chair rather than sit on it, but this man was worried about leaving a smudge. "It is just a chair," I said firmly, "and my name is Evelyn. Please, sit." He lowered himself gingerly onto the edge of the seat, keeping his body tense, ready to bolt. I looked around the room. On a side table, there was a silver service set out for the family, a carafe of hot coffee, a pitcher of water, and a tray of delicate cucumber sandwiches and pastries that no one had touched. I went to the table. I poured a glass of water, my movements automatic. I felt a strange dissociation, as if I were watching myself from the ceiling. Was I really doing this? Was I really hiding in a back room with a homeless stranger while the city's elite buried my grandfather 50 feet away? Yes, and it felt like the first honest thing I had done in years. I brought the water to him. He took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered. He drank it in one long, desperate gulp. "Would you like coffee?" I asked. "Or food? There are sandwiches." He looked at the tray, and I saw a flash of raw hunger in his eyes that he tried to hide. "I wouldn't want to take from the family," he said. "The family," I said, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth, "has more than enough. Please, take whatever you want." I brought the tray over and set it on the small table beside him. He took a sandwich, eating it quickly, then another. I poured him a cup of coffee, adding 2 sugars and cream, just guessing at what might provide the most comfort. As he ate, some of the tension began to drain from his shoulders. The frantic terror in his eyes settled into a weary sadness. I pulled up a chair opposite him. I didn't care about my black dress or the dust. I just wanted to understand. "You said you knew him," I said softly. "You said you knew Arthur." He paused, a half-eaten pastry in his hand. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a spark of intelligence and clarity that cut through the appearance of destitution. These were not the eyes of a man lost to madness. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much. "I did," he said. His voice was stronger now, bolstered by the food and the quiet. "We were associates, a long time ago, before the towers, before the shipping empire." "I have never seen you before," I said, "and I spent every summer with him until I was 18. "Arthur kept his world separate," the man said. He placed the empty cup on the saucer with a delicate clink. "He had the world of the high-rises, the boardrooms, the people like your uncle, and then he had the world where he actually lived, the world of ideas, of struggle." He looked down at his hands. They were rough, calloused, the nails broken. "My name is Samuel Reed." "Samuel," I repeated. The name meant nothing to me. It appeared on no guest lists, no corporate hierarchies, no family trees. "I didn't come to cause a scene, Miss Evelyn," Samuel said. "I truly didn't. I saw the obituary in a discarded newspaper 2 days ago. It said the service was public. I didn't realize the definition of public had changed." "It hasn't," I said, feeling a flush of shame for my relatives. "My family has just forgotten what the word means. They think the world is a private club." "Arthur worried about that," Samuel mused. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "He used to tell me that wealth was like seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. He was afraid of what the salt was doing to his children." I stared at him. That sounded exactly like my grandfather. It was the specific cadence of his speech, the way he used metaphors from the ocean. Arthur Green had started as a dock worker. He loved the sea. My mother hated the ocean. She only liked yachts. You really were friends, I realized. We were partners, Samuel corrected gently. In a manner of speaking, we started on the same dock. We loaded the same crates. We dreamed the same dreams. But life takes people on different currents. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. He wrote to me, last week, just before he passed. My eyes widened. He wrote to you? Grandfather couldn't hold a pen in his final days. He was too weak. He dictated it, Samuel said, to his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. The mention of Harrison Sterling made my stomach drop. Sterling was the vault where all of Grandfather's secrets were kept. If Sterling had contacted this man, this was not a casual acquaintance. This was something else. Why are you here, Samuel? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Really? He looked at the door, as if checking to make sure we were still alone, then looked back at me. He asked me to come. He said he didn't want to be surrounded only by people waiting for him to die. He wanted one person there who remembered him when he had nothing. Tears pricked my eyes. I blinked them back. They treated you like garbage out there. People fear what they don't understand, Samuel said with a shrug, as if the insults were nothing more than bad weather. And they fear poverty most of all, because looking at me reminds them of how fragile their own luck is. Your uncle. He is a frightened man. He needs his expensive suit to hold himself together. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. That is the most accurate description of Julian I have ever heard. Evelyn, Samuel said, his tone turning serious. You defended me. You stood up to them. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, I said. I couldn't watch it. It was wrong. It cost you, he observed. I saw your mother's face. You just cut ties with a lot of money. I don't care about their money, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I have a job. I have a life. I don't need their permission to exist. Samuel studied me for a long moment. It felt like he was weighing my soul, measuring my worth not in dollars but in something far more substantial. Arthur said you were the only one, he murmured, almost to himself. The only one what? The only one who had his heart, Samuel said. He said the others had his nose, or his chin, or his stubbornness. But you, he said you had his heart. I bit my lip, fighting the sob that threatened to escape. To hear this from a stranger, a man my family would have swept into the gutter, was overwhelming. I miss him, I whispered. I know, Samuel said. He reached into his oversized pocket and pulled out a clean, though wrinkled, handkerchief. He offered it to me. He misses you too. I think, or he would, if the dead can miss the living. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of the organ starting up again. The service was concluding. Soon, they would be moving to the cemetery. I knew I couldn't go with them. I couldn't get in that limousine with my mother and pretend nothing had happened. What will you do now? I asked Samuel. Do you have a place to stay? I get by, he said evasively. That is not an answer, I said. It is going to rain tonight. You can't be on the street. I have survived worse than rain, Miss Evelyn. I am sure you have, I said. But you are not going to survive it tonight, not on my watch. A plan was forming in my mind. It was reckless. It was illogical. It was exactly the kind of risk assessment I would have red flagged at my job. But this wasn't business. This was personal. You are coming with me, I stated. Samuel blinked. Excuse me? The service is ending, I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my dress. My family will be heading to the cemetery, and then to a reception at the plaza. I'm not going to either. I'm going home. And you are coming with me. Miss Evelyn, I cannot, Samuel protested, standing up as well. I cannot impose, and think of what people will say. Let them talk, I said, feeling a surge of defiance. They are already talking. Let's give them something real to discuss. You don't know me, he warned. "I could be anyone." "You are a friend of Arthur Green," I said. "That is all the reference I need." Samuel looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, he took a step closer. His voice dropped, becoming grave and heavy with implication. "You are making a choice, Evelyn, a choice that will change your life." "I know," I said. "No." He shook his head slowly. "You don't know. Not yet." He paused, and a strange light entered his eyes, a mix of sorrow and steel. Tomorrow morning is the reading of the will, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, surprised he knew the schedule. "At 10 o'clock?" "I will go with you," Samuel said. I stared at him. "To the lawyer's office? My family will riot. They will have you arrested." "Let them try," Samuel said. He straightened his back. For a moment, the slouch of the homeless man vanished, replaced by a posture of command that seemed incredibly out of place in his ragged clothes. "I have a right to be there." "Why?" I asked. "Why would you want to be there?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Because tomorrow," Samuel Reed said, "everyone will understand why I am here. Tomorrow, the mask comes off." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the sensation of standing on a cliff edge, watching the fog clear to reveal a drop you hadn't known was there. "Okay," I said. I didn't question him further. I didn't ask for proof. I simply believed him. I walked to the door and opened it a crack. The nave was emptying. The coffin was being wheeled out. My family was following it. A procession of black coats and hard hearts. They didn't look back. They didn't look for me. They had already cut me loose. "Come on, Samuel," I said, opening the door wider. "Let's go home." He nodded and placed his cap back on his head. As we walked out of the church, not through the main doors but through the side exit into the gray, blustery afternoon, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had lost a family I never really had, but I had gained a mystery that felt like a legacy. I hailed a taxi. The driver looked at me, in my designer dress, and then at Samuel, in his filth, and hesitated. "Get in," I told Samuel, holding the door open. He climbed in. I followed him, slamming the door on the world I was leaving behind. As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic, I looked at Samuel. He was watching the city pass by, a calm, enigmatic expression on his face. I didn't know it yet, but the man sitting beside me was holding a grenade that was about to blow the Green family empire into dust, and I had just pulled the pin. My apartment was not a place my family visited. Located in a walk-up building in a neighborhood that real estate agents generously described as up-and-coming, it was a far cry from the gated estates and penthouses of the Green dynasty. The paint in the hallway was peeling. The elevator had been out of service since 2019, and the radiator clanked with the rhythmic hostility of a prisoner banging a tin cup against bars. But as I unlocked the door and ushered Samuel Reed inside, for the first time, I did not feel defensive about my living situation. In fact, as Samuel stepped over the threshold, bringing with him the damp chill of the storm, the warmth of my small sanctuary felt like a victory. "It is small," I said, closing the door and engaging the deadbolt, "but it is mine." Samuel stood in the center of the living room. He did not look at the ceiling stains or the worn rug I had bought at a flea market. He looked at the walls. They were covered in framed maps, antique nautical charts I had collected over the years, and bookshelves that were overflowing with paperbacks, not first editions bought for display. He walked over to the nearest bookshelf, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached out a dirty hand, hesitated, then withdrew it, careful not to smudge the spine of a book on economic theory. "This is a home," he said quietly, "not a showroom." "My mother calls it a closet," I said, tossing my keys into the bowl by the door. "She says I live like a graduate student who forgot to grow up." "Your mother confuses square footage with substance," Samuel said. He turned to look at me. "Arthur lived in a place like this. When he started, before the first million, he always said those were the best years because he knew exactly who his friends were. The walls were thin, So you couldn't keep secrets. He looked around again, his eyes landing on my small desk in the corner, cluttered with monitors and stacks of risk assessment reports. You work hard, he observed. I can see the energy in this room. It is not stagnant. I try, I said. I'm a risk analyst. I spend my life trying to predict what could go wrong. A useful skill, Samuel murmured. Though some risks are invisible, no matter how much data you have. I looked at him, standing there in his filth, shivering slightly. The adrenaline of the church confrontation was fading, replaced by the practical reality of having a homeless stranger in my living room. I needed to be a host, not a savior. Samuel, the bathroom is down the hall, I said. The water pressure isn't great, but the water is hot. I think I have some clothes that might fit you. They belong to an ex-boyfriend who was about your height. They are just sweatpants and a t-shirt, but they are clean. He looked down at his ruined army jacket. I would be grateful, he said. I have not felt hot water in a long time. And yet, my hands were steady. When Samuel emerged 20 minutes later, he looked like a different man. The layers of grime were gone, revealing skin that was pale and scarred but scrubbed pink. He had shaved using the disposable razor I kept in the cabinet, revealing a strong jawline that I hadn't seen beneath the gray stubble. Wearing the gray sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt, he looked smaller, more fragile, but also strangely dignified. He walked with less of a shuffle. He sat at my small kitchen table. I placed a bowl of tomato soup and a plate of toast in front of him. Thank you, he said. He picked up the spoon, his hand trembling slightly, but he ate with the manners of a gentleman. He didn't slurp or shovel the food. He ate methodically, appreciating every bite. You mentioned you were a partner of my grandfather, I said, sitting opposite him with a mug of tea. But I know the company history. I have read the archives. There is no mention of a Samuel Reed. History is written by the survivors, Samuel said, dipping a piece of toast into the soup. And the lawyers, Arthur and I, we had a disagreement about the direction of the company in 1982, specifically regarding the acquisition of the Redstone line. I froze. My mug hovered halfway to my mouth. The Redstone acquisition was legendary in our family. It was the deal that had cemented Arthur Green's status as a billionaire. It was a hostile takeover, brutal and efficient, that had given Green Shipping a monopoly on the Atlantic trade routes. Grandfather called that his greatest victory, I said. Arthur called it his greatest regret, Samuel corrected me softly. Publicly, it was a victory. Privately, he knew he had destroyed 3,000 jobs to save a decimal point on a balance sheet. That was the day I left. I told him he was building a kingdom on quicksand. He told me I didn't have the stomach for the big leagues. Samuel looked up, his eyes sharp. He financed the deal with high-yield bonds that were structured to default if the market dipped below 4% growth. It was a gamble, a reckless one. He won. But he never slept soundly after that. He spent the next 40 years trying to buy back his conscience. I stared at him. The detail about the bonds, the specific structure of the debt, was not public knowledge. I had only seen it because I had dug into the deepest, dustiest physical files in the company basement for a retrospective project 3 years ago. It was classified information, buried under decades of corporate redactions. How do you know about the bond structure? I asked, my voice tight. That is not in the papers. Samuel smiled, a small, sad expression. Because I wrote the algorithm that calculated the risk. Evelyn, I told him it was 40-60 against us. He took the bet anyway. I sat back in my chair, the wood pressing hard against my spine. A homeless man who wrote risk algorithms? A man who spoke of 1980s corporate finance with the casual familiarity of someone discussing the weather? Who are you? I asked. You are not just a friend from the docks. I am exactly who I appear to be, Samuel said, returning to his soup. A man with no address, no assets, and no future. Do not mistake memory for power. Evelyn, knowing things does not change where I sleep at night. I watched him. He was deflecting. But the precision of his knowledge was terrifying. He wasn't crazy. He was hiding something. Or rather, he was a puzzle piece that had been lost for decades, and suddenly, he had fallen right into the center of the picture. The sudden shrill ring of my cell phone on the counter made us both jump. I looked at the screen. The name displayed was Harrison Sterling. I hesitated. It was 9 o'clock at night. Sterling never called past 6. "Answer it," Samuel said. He didn't look up from his bowl. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" "Evelyn," Sterling's voice was gravelly, sounding exhausted. "I am sorry to call so late. I assumed you would want to know." "Know what?" I asked. "Your mother has been calling my office every 10 minutes for the past hour," Sterling said. "She is demanding that I bar you from the reading of the will tomorrow. She claims you are mentally unstable. She claims the incident at the church proves you are unfit to be in the room." I gripped the phone tighter. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that Arthur's instructions were explicit," Sterling said. "All grandchildren are to be present, regardless of their current standing with the family. If you are not there, the will cannot be executed." "I will be there," I said firmly. "Good," Sterling said. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock sharp. And Evelyn?" "Yes?" "I heard what you did today," the old lawyer said. There was a pause, a heavy silence on the line. "Your grandfather would have been proud. He always said you were the only one with a spine." "Thank you, Harrison," I said. "One more thing," Sterling added, his voice dropping a decibel. "Is he with you?" My heart stopped. I looked at Samuel. He had finished his soup and was sitting with his hands folded in his lap, watching me. "Is who with me?" I feigned ignorance. "The man from the church," Sterling said. "Samuel." "Why would you ask that?" "Because," Sterling said, "if he is with you, tell him that the package has been delivered. He will know what it means, and bring him with you tomorrow. It is necessary." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. The room felt suddenly very small and very charged with electricity. "It was Sterling," I said. "I assumed so," Samuel said. "He said—" I paused, trying to process the impossibility of it. "He said the package has been delivered, and he said you need to come with me tomorrow." Samuel nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "Then it begins." "What begins?" I demanded. "Samuel, you have to tell me what is going on. You write algorithms. You know about the Redstone deal. The family lawyer knows you. You are not a random homeless man." "I am a man who made a promise," Samuel said. He stood up and carried his bowl to the sink. He washed it, dried it, and placed it in the rack. The domesticity of the action clashed violently with the mystery hanging in the air. "Go to sleep, Evelyn," he said, turning to me. "You have a long day tomorrow. You are going to see the worst of your family. You need your strength." "I can't sleep," I said. "Not with all these questions." "The answers are coming," he said. "Arthur arranged it all. He was a man who liked theater. He liked the dramatic reveal. If I tell you now, I spoil his final act, and I owe him that much." He walked over to the sofa, where I had laid out a blanket and a pillow. He sat down, testing the cushion. "This is better than a park bench," he said softly. "Thank you." I realized I wasn't going to get anything more out of him tonight. He was a vault, locked tight, and the combination was in a dead man's hand. I retreated to my bedroom and closed the door. But I didn't lock it. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain hammer against the window pane. The city outside was loud, a constant hum of traffic and sirens, but inside, the apartment was heavy with a silent presence. I felt like I was 10 years old again, sitting on the rug in grandfather's study while he moved chess pieces around a board. He never told me what his strategy was. He just told me to watch the board. "Evie, the pieces move even when you are not touching them." I turned over, clutching the duvet. My family thought they were the players. They thought the game was about money. But lying there in the dark, with a stranger sleeping on my couch, and a cryptic message from a lawyer echoing in my head, I realized they were wrong. They weren't the players. They were the pieces. And the hand moving us was reaching out from the grave. Arthur Green wasn't done with us yet. He had one last lesson to teach, and I had a terrible, sinking feeling that the tuition was going to be expensive. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I saw the image of Samuel's eyes, intelligent, sad, and terrifyingly knowing, and I saw the closed casket in the church. "What did you do? Grandpa?" I whispered into the darkness. "What did you do?" The only answer was the wind rattling the window frame, sounding like a chuckle. The conference room at Sterling and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was situated on the 45th floor, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the skyline my grandfather had helped build. The table was a slab of polished black granite, long enough to land a small aircraft on, and around it sat the vultures. My mother, Beatrice, was already seated at the head of the table, a spot she clearly felt entitled to. Uncle Julian was to her right, aggressively tapping a gold pen against a leather notebook. My cousins, Preston and Sarah, were scrolling through their phones, looking bored, as if waiting for an inheritance was simply a tedious administrative hurdle before the shopping spree could begin. When I opened the heavy glass door and walked in, the room went silent, but when Samuel followed me, the silence shattered. Samuel was wearing the clothes I had given him, the gray sweatpants and white t-shirt, and while he was clean, he looked undeniably out of place against the backdrop of Italian suits and silk blouses. He looked like a glitch in their perfect matrix. "You have got to be kidding me," Uncle Julian said, throwing his pen down. It clattered loudly against the granite. "Evelyn, this is a legal proceeding, not a homeless shelter. Get him out." My mother did not even look at Samuel. She looked at me with a gaze that could have frozen water. "I told Harrison to ban you if you insisted on this charade. Clearly, the security in this building is as incompetent as your judgment." "Mr. Reed is with me," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid thumping of my heart. I pulled out a chair at the far end of the table, opposite my mother. "Please, sit down, Samuel." "He will not sit down," Julian shouted, standing up. His face was flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is insane. I am calling the police. You are trespassing, and you are harassing a grieving family." "Sit down." "Julian," a voice cut through the air. It was not my voice. Harrison Sterling stood at the head of the room, near a podium. He had entered through a side door, unnoticed in the commotion. The executor of the estate looked tired, his skin papery and gray, but his eyes were sharp. He held a thick leather binder in his hands. "Harrison," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Finally, please remove this, individual, so we can proceed with my father's wishes." "I cannot do that, Beatrice," Sterling said calmly. He walked to the head of the table and placed the binder down. "Mr. Reed is listed as a primary beneficiary in the last will and testament of Arthur Green. If he leaves, the reading stops, and the assets remain frozen indefinitely." The room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. My mother blinked. "Beneficiary? That tramp?" "Watch your words, Mother," I said sharply. "Mr. Reed," Sterling continued, ignoring her outburst, "please take a seat." Samuel sat. He did not look at my family. He kept his eyes fixed on the binder. He looked sorrowful, not triumphant. Sterling opened the binder. He adjusted his reading glasses. "I will skip the standard preamble regarding mental competence. As I can assure you, Arthur was of sound mind until the very end. We will move directly to the distribution of assets and control of Green Shipping and its subsidiaries." Julian leaned forward, his greed momentarily outweighing his anger. "Get on with it." "To my daughter, Beatrice, and my son, Julian," Sterling read, his voice devoid of emotion. "I leave the family estates in the Hamptons and Aspen, along with a monthly stipend of $50,000, adjusted for inflation, for the duration of their natural lives." "Stipend?" Julian choked. "50,000? That doesn't even cover the maintenance on the yacht." "The yacht," Sterling said, looking over his glasses, "is being sold. Proceeds to go to the Green Foundation." This is unacceptable. Mother slammed her hand on the table. I will contest this. We are the heirs. We are entitled to the shares. We are entitled to the controlling interest. We are not finished, Sterling said. His voice hardened. Regarding the ownership and control of the Green Empire, including all proprietary technology, shipping routes, and the majority shareholding block. He turned a page. The paper rustled loudly. It is imperative, Sterling read, reciting my grandfather's words, that the history of this company be corrected. For 40 years, the world has believed I built this empire alone. This was a lie I told to protect the company, but it is a lie that ends today. The proprietary logistical algorithms and the initial capital that saved this company from bankruptcy in 1982 did not come from me. They came from my silent partner. Sterling looked up and gestured to the man in the sweatpants. I leave 49% of the voting shares and the retroactive recognition of co-founder status to Mr. Samuel Reed. The explosion was immediate. That is a lie, Julian roared. That is a fraud. This man is a bum off the street. He brainwashed an old man. He is not a bum, Sterling said, his voice rising for the first time. He is the architect of the Redstone deal. He is the man who wrote the code that runs your logistics network. And for the last 30 years, while you were spending money, he has been living in anonymity because of a non-compete clause that expired yesterday at midnight. I looked at Samuel. He was staring at his hands. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had carried a heavy weight for a lifetime and had finally set it down. 49%. My cousin Preston did the math out loud, his face pale. That is billions. And the control? Mother demanded, her voice shrill. Who runs the company? You said 49%. That is not a majority. Who has the other 51? Who is the CEO? Sterling turned the page again. Arthur knew that the company needed leadership that valued integrity over profit, Sterling said. He watched this family closely. He saw who treated the staff with respect. He saw who worked for a living. He saw who stood up for the vulnerable. My stomach turned over. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I knew what was coming before he said it. I leave the controlling interest of 51% and the position of Chief Executive Officer of Green Strategies, effectively immediately, to my granddaughter, Evelyn Green. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy, suffocating, and dangerous. I sat frozen. CEO, 51%. I was 28 years old. I was a risk analyst. I wasn't an executive. No, Julian whispered. He looked at me with pure hatred. Her? The mouse? She doesn't know how to run a boardroom. She will destroy us in a week. Evelyn, my mother said, her voice trembling. Evelyn, you cannot accept this. You are not equipped. You will sign it over to me. We will fix this. We will give you a nice payout, and you can go back to your little apartment. She will do no such thing. Samuel spoke up. His voice was not loud, but it had the timbre of steel. He stood up slowly. Arthur chose Evelyn because she was the only one who didn't want the job for the power. She wanted the work. You shut up! Julian lunged toward Samuel, but Sterling slammed the binder shut with a crack like a gunshot. Sit down, Julian, Sterling barked, or I will have security remove you. And this time, it will be permanent. The will has a contestability clause. If any beneficiary challenges the validity of this document, they forfeit their stipend. Do you want to lose the $50,000 a month? Because that is all you have left. Julian fell back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. He looked defeated, gray, and suddenly very old. There is one final condition, Sterling said, looking at me. While Evelyn Green holds the title of CEO and the majority vote, she cannot make unilateral decisions regarding the liquidation or restructuring of the core assets without the approval of the minority shareholder. He nodded at Samuel. Mr. Reed retains the role of strategic overseer. He is your advisor. Evelyn, you run the ship, but he reads the map. I looked at Samuel. He offered me a small, tentative smile. It was the first time I realized that this wasn't just a gift. It was a partnership, Grandfather hadn't just left me a company, he had left me a teacher. "This is ridiculous," Mother hissed, standing up and gathering her purse. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "I am leaving. I will not sit here and be insulted. A homeless man and a child. You will run this company into the ground." "If we do," I said, finding my voice, "at least we will do it honestly." My mother froze. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. She realized that I held the purse strings now. She realized that her status, her society luncheons, her entire identity, depended on the good graces of the daughter she had marginalized for years. "We will see," she spat, and stormed out of the room. Julian followed her, looking like a man marching to the gallows. My cousins lingered for a second, looking from me to Samuel, clearly wondering if they should switch allegiances, before deciding to follow their parents. The door clicked shut. Only Sterling, Samuel, and I remained. "Well," Sterling let out a long sigh, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "That went better than I expected. No one threw a chair." "They are in shock," Samuel said. "The anger will come later, when the credit cards are declined." I looked at the two men. "You planned this. Grandfather planned this. He knew they would mock you at the funeral." "He hoped they wouldn't," Samuel said gently. "He gave them a chance, Evelyn. If even one of them had shown me kindness, if even one of them had offered me a seat, the will would have been different. He wanted to believe they were better than they appeared." "But they weren't," I said. "No," Samuel said, "but you were." I looked out the window at the city below. I was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire. I had a co-founder who had been living on the streets yesterday. My family was going to declare war on me. The media was going to tear me apart. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. "I analyze risk. Samuel, this is statistically impossible to survive." Samuel walked over to the window and stood beside me. He smelled of soap and clean cotton, but his presence felt like the deep ocean, vast and formidable. "Arthur didn't bet on statistics," Samuel said. "He bet on character, and the game has just started. Evelyn, now, we have to save the company from the rot your uncle left behind." I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like a mouse anymore. I looked like a green, but for the first time, it was a version of the name I could be proud of. "Okay," I said. "Where do we start?" Sterling opened the binder again. "We start with the audit," he said grimly, "because I suspect Julian has been doing more than just buying yachts. There are holes in the accounts. Evelyn, big ones." I nodded. The grief was still there, sharp and aching, but it was joined by a new sensation, purpose. "Let's get to work," I said. The accusation arrived at 9 a.m. on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. It was a cease and desist order combined with a formal notice of intent to contest the will, filed by a law firm that charged more per hour than most of my staff made in a week. My mother and Uncle Julian were not wasting time. Their narrative was predictable but dangerous. They claimed that Arthur Green had been suffering from advanced dementia and that Samuel Reed was a grifter who had preyed on a confused old man to insert himself into a legacy he had no right to touch. I sat in the CEO's office, a room that still smelled faintly of my grandfather's cigar smoke, and read the document. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from a simmering anger. They were willing to drag grandfather's mental state through the mud just to keep their access to the corporate credit cards. Samuel sat opposite me. He had traded the sweatpants for a modest, off-the-rack suit that Sterling had procured for him. It did not fit perfectly, but he wore it with an air of indifference that made the tailoring irrelevant. "They are calling you a con artist," I said, sliding the paper across the mahogany desk. "They say you exercised undue influence." Samuel barely glanced at the paper. "They can call me whatever they like. Evelyn, the truth is not a popularity contest. It is a matter of record." "But do we have the record?" I asked, leaning forward. "Burden of proof is on us to show that your claim to 49% of this company is legitimate. If we cannot prove you were a co-founder, The courts will freeze everything. The stock price dropped 6% this morning just on the rumors. Samuel reached into the leather briefcase he had brought with him. It was old. The leather cracked, but he handled it with reverence. He pulled out a thick, yellowing folder and placed it on the desk. "Open it," he said. I opened the folder. Inside were documents that looked like they belonged in a museum. There were incorporation papers from 1978. There were handwritten ledgers, and there was a contract, signed in blue ink that had faded over decades but was still legible. It was a partnership agreement between Arthur Green and Samuel Reed. It detailed the initial investment. Arthur put up the money, and Samuel put up the intellectual property, specifically, the logistical code that allowed Green Shipping to optimize routes in a way no other company could match at the time. "Look at the date," Samuel said. I looked. August 4th, 1978. "Now look at the patent filing for the core routing algorithm," he instructed. I turned the page. The patent was filed on August 5th, 1978. The inventor listed was Samuel Reed. The assignee was Green Shipping. "I didn't just give him money," Samuel said softly. "I gave him the engine. Without that code, Green Shipping would have been just another trucking company in Jersey. Arthur knew that. The family thinks they are fighting a homeless man. They do not realize they are fighting the man who built the house they live in." I looked up at him, stunned. The proof was irrefutable. It wasn't just a claim. It was the DNA of the company. "This kills their fraud argument," I said, feeling a surge of relief. "But it doesn't stop them from trying to destroy us in the press. They are leaking stories that I am incompetent and that you are unstable." "Let them talk," Samuel said. "While they are talking, we are going to be counting." He pointed to a clause in the will that I had glossed over during the emotional chaos of the reading. It was a subsection regarding the transition of power. Arthur included a mandatory audit clause, Samuel explained. He stipulated that upon his death, an external, forensic audit must be conducted on all subsidiary accounts before the estate can be fully settled. He told the family it was a standard government compliance issue. It wasn't. I read the clause. It was draconian. It gave the auditors unrestricted access to every transaction going back 10 years. It was a trap, I realized, the air leaving my lungs. Grandfather knew. He knew they were stealing from him. He suspected, Samuel corrected, but Arthur was a man who loved his family too much to arrest them while he was alive. He left that burden to us. He knew that if they contested the will, they would have to prove they were better stewards of the company than us, and to do that, they would have to open their books. I picked up the phone. "Get me the head of internal audit," I told my assistant, "and call Northwind Meridian. I want their best forensic team here in 1 hour." The rest of the week was a bloodbath, but not the kind my family expected. While they were giving interviews to the tabloids about my betrayal, I was buried in spreadsheets. The forensic team worked in a sealed conference room. What they found was not just negligence, it was systematic looting. Uncle Julian had set up a consulting firm in the Cayman Islands. For the last 7 years, Green Shipping had been paying this firm $200,000 a month for strategic advisory services. There were no reports, no emails, no deliverables, just invoices and wire transfers. My mother was less sophisticated but equally greedy. She had charged personal expenses to the company marketing budget. Renovations on her summer home were listed as corporate retreat site maintenance. Her wardrobe was client relations uniforms. We were talking about $3 million over 5 years. "They are not just contesting a will," I told Samuel as we looked at the final report on Friday evening. "They are walking into a prison cell." "They don't know we have this yet," Samuel said. "They think the audit is just a formality." "We need to stabilize the company first," I said, my risk analyst brain taking over. "If this comes out all at once, the stock will tank. Investors will think the whole ship is rotten." "Then show them the captain is steady," Samuel advised. I called an emergency board meeting. The non-family board members were skeptical. Terrified by the plunging stock price and the family drama, I walked into the room not as the granddaughter, but as the CEO. I didn't use emotional appeals. I used data. I showed them the original partnership agreement with Samuel to legitimize his position. I showed them the operational efficiency numbers that Samuel had already begun to tweak in the last 3 days. And then, I showed them the redacted version of the audit, enough to show that the leakage of funds had been identified and plugged, without naming Julian and Beatrice directly yet. The hemorrhage has stopped, I told the board. The capital that was being drained by inefficiencies is now being reinvested into the fleet. We project a 12% increase in net revenue by the next quarter simply by stopping the theft. The board members looked at the numbers. They looked at the patent documents, and slowly, the tension in the room broke. "You are telling us," one of the directors said, "that the company is actually more profitable than we thought? It was just being robbed?" "Yes," I said, "and the robbery is over." By the time the markets closed that Friday, green shipping stock had rebounded by 4%. We were not out of the woods, but we were not sinking. The real climax, however, happened an hour later. My secretary buzzed in. "Your uncle and mother are here. They are demanding to see you. They have the police with them." I looked at Samuel. He sat calmly on the sofa, reading a book on maritime law. "Showtime," he said. Julian stormed in, followed by Beatrice and 2 uncomfortable-looking police officers. "That is him!" Julian pointed a shaking finger at Samuel. "Arrest him for trespassing and fraud, and arrest her for corporate theft. She has locked us out of our own accounts." I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't get angry. I felt a cold, hard clarity. "Officers," I said, my voice cutting through Julian's bluster, "before you arrest anyone, you might want to look at this." I handed the lead officer the file containing the evidence of the Cayman Islands transfers and the fraudulent invoices. "This is a preliminary forensic audit," I said. "It details approximately $15 million in embezzled funds over the last decade. The names on the unauthorized accounts match the personal bank details of Julian Green and Beatrice Green." The room went dead silent. Julian's face turned the color of ash. That is a fabrication." "It is verified by an independent firm," I said, "and per the bylaws of this company and the conditions of the will, any beneficiary found to have defrauded the company is automatically disqualified from inheritance and is subject to immediate legal action." I looked at my mother. She was gripping her Chanel bag so hard her knuckles were white. She looked from the police officer to me, and the realization hit her. She wasn't the hunter anymore. She was the prey. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "Evelyn, we are family." "You made it very clear at the funeral that I was not part of your family," I said. "You mocked a man for being poor while you were stealing millions to pretend you were rich." The police officer looked at the documents, then at Julian. "Sir, is this true? Do you have an explanation for these transfers?" It was consulting," Julian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "We will need to take these into evidence," the officer said, his tone shifting from deferential to professional. "And we will need you both to come down to the station to answer some questions regarding these transactions." "You are arresting us?" Beatrice shrieked. "I am Beatrice Green. My father built this city." "Your father," Samuel spoke up, standing up slowly, "built a shipping company. You built a house of cards, and the wind just changed." The officers escorted them out. They weren't in handcuffs yet, but the humiliation was absolute. As the door closed, leaving Samuel and me alone in the silent office, I collapsed into my chair. My hands were shaking. "It is done," I whispered. "Not yet," Samuel said, his eyes dark. "They are cornered animals now, Evelyn, and cornered animals bite. This was just the opening skirmish. The real war is in the courtroom." I looked at the empty chairs where my family had sat. I felt a profound sense of loss, but also a strange, clean freedom. The rot was gone. Now, we just had to survive the surgery. The civil trial to determine the validity of Arthur Green's last will and testament began on a Tuesday that felt more like a media circus than a legal proceeding. The sidewalk in front of the New York State Supreme Court was a gauntlet of microphones, cameras, and shouting reporters. My family had been busy, In the 3 weeks since the audit revelation, they had spun a narrative so dense with lies it was almost impressive. According to the tabloids, I was a brainwashed granddaughter under the spell of a homeless grifter, and my mother and uncle were the tragic heroes fighting to save the family legacy from madness. "Head up," Samuel whispered to me as we stepped out of the black sedan. "Do not look at the cameras. Look at the horizon." We walked up the granite steps, flanked by Harrison Sterling and a team of security guards. I could hear the questions being hurled at us like stones. Is it true he slept in your apartment? Did you drug your grandfather? How much are you paying the homeless man? I kept my eyes forward. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and smelled of floor wax and anxiety. My mother and Uncle Julian sat at the plaintiff's table. They looked immaculate. Beatrice was wearing a soft cream suit that made her look maternal and aggrieved, a calculated departure from her usual sharp black armor. Julian looked somber, his hands clasped in prayer-like fashion on the table. Their lawyer, a man named Marcus Vane, who was known for destroying reputations for sport, stood up to deliver his opening statement. "Your Honor," Vane began, his voice smooth as oil, "this case is not about money. It is about the protection of the vulnerable. Arthur Green was a titan, yes, but in his final days, he was confused, he was isolated, and he was preyed upon by a stranger who wandered in off the street, a man with no history, no assets, and no connection to this family, and a granddaughter who saw an opportunity to seize power. The document before you is not a will, it is a weapon." I sat stone-faced. It was a good performance. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him. But then it was our turn. Harrison Sterling did not use flowery language. He did not pace around the courtroom. He simply stood at the podium and adjusted his glasses. "We intend to prove 3 things, Your Honor," Sterling said. "First, that Samuel Reed is not a stranger, but the co-architect of the Green Empire. Second, that the exclusion of the plaintiffs from the will was a deliberate moral choice made by a man of sound mind. And third, that the plaintiffs are currently under criminal investigation for the very greed that Arthur Green sought to prevent." The gasp in the gallery was audible. The first 2 days of the trial were a blur of procedural arguments, but the tide turned on the 3rd day when Samuel took the stand. Vane tried to tear him apart. He attacked Samuel's lack of address, his appearance, his gap in employment history. "Mr. Reed," Vane sneered, "you claim to be a businessman, yet you have spent the last decade living in shelters. You claim to be a partner, yet you own nothing. Is it not true that you are simply a consummate actor?" Samuel looked at Vane with a pitying expression. "I own nothing because I chose to own nothing. Mr. Vane, freedom is expensive." "Objection. Philosophical rambling," Vane snapped. "Sustained," the judge sighed. "Let us look at the evidence," Sterling said on redirect. He projected an image onto the courtroom screens. It was the patent document for the logistical algorithm, dated August 5, 1978. "Mr. Reed," Sterling asked, "can you tell the court what this is?" "That is the source code for the dynamic routing system used by Green Shipping," Samuel said. "I wrote it on a napkin in a diner in Queens, and then I transcribed it to a mainframe 3 days later." "And who is listed as the inventor?" "I am," Samuel said. "And do you have the original partnership agreement?" "I do." When the 1978 agreement was entered into evidence, I saw the color drain from Uncle Julian's face. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, leaned forward to inspect the documents. She compared the signatures. She looked at the dates. "This document grants Mr. Reed 49% of the company upon the death of Arthur Green," Justice Halloway noted, looking over her spectacles at the defense table. "This predates the plaintiff's involvement in the company by 2 decades. The narrative of the homeless grifter evaporated in seconds. Samuel wasn't a charity case. He was the landlord coming to collect the rent. But the emotional blow came when I took the stand. Vane tried to paint the funeral as a moment of my instability. He asked if I had caused a scene. He asked if I had shouted at my mother. I did raise my voice, I admitted, looking directly at the jury. And why did you feel the need to disrespect your grandfather's funeral? Vane pressed. I didn't disrespect it, I said, my voice steady. I defended it. Defended it from whom? Your own mother? From cruelty, I said. From the people who were laughing at a man because his coat was dirty. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, my grandfather left me a letter. It was attached to the will. It explained why he invited Samuel to the funeral. I have seen the letter, Justice Holloway said. Please, continue. He said it was a test, I said. He said that if his children could not show basic human decency to a man they thought was beneath them, they could not be trusted with the power to rule over thousands of employees. He didn't disinherit them because he was crazy. He disinherited them because he saw them clearly. I looked at my mother. She refused to meet my eyes. She was staring at the table, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. The shame was finally starting to stick. Then came the final strike. Sterling introduced the forensic audit. Your Honor, Sterling said, the plaintiffs argue that they are the rightful stewards of this company. However, evidence shows that over the past 7 years, they have systematically siphoned approximately $15 million into offshore accounts and personal expenditures. We displayed the invoices, the consulting fees to the Cayman Islands, the renovations, the jewelry. This is irrelevant, Vane shouted, jumping up. This is a probate hearing, not a criminal trial. It goes to character and fitness, Justice Holloway said, her voice like ice. And it speaks to the testator's intent. If Arthur Green suspected this theft, he had every reason to cut them off. The judge looked at the bank records. She looked at Julian, who was now sweating profusely. She looked at the patent documents. She didn't need to deliberate for long. The court is ready to rule, Justice Holloway announced after a brief recess. The room fell silent. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Samuel reached under the table and squeezed my hand briefly. His grip was warm and solid. The plaintiff's claim of undue influence is dismissed with prejudice, the judge stated. The court finds that Arthur Green was of sound mind and acted with clear, deliberate intent. The last will and testament is valid. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Furthermore, the judge continued, looking sharply at Julian and Beatrice, the court finds the evidence of financial impropriety concerning, I am forwarding the forensic audit to the district attorney's office for review regarding potential embezzlement charges. The assets of the plaintiffs derived from the estate are frozen pending that investigation. No, my mother cried out, standing up. You can't do this. It is my money. It was never your money, Mrs. Green, the judge said, banging her gavel. It was the company's money. Court is adjourned. The chaos that followed was absolute. Reporters surged forward. Julian slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. My mother was shouting at her lawyer, her face a mask of twisted rage. I stood up. I felt lightheaded. We had won. Not just the company, but the truth. Come, Samuel said, guiding me through the crowd. Do not stop to gloat. It is beneath you. We pushed through the heavy doors and out into the hallway. The flashbulbs were blinding, but I didn't care. Ms. Green, a reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in my face. How does it feel to take everything from your family? I stopped. I looked at the reporter, then back at the courtroom doors where my mother and uncle were being kept back by bailiffs. I didn't take anything from them, I said, my voice calm and amplified by a dozen microphones. They lost it the moment they decided that money was more important than people. I turned to Samuel. Let's go to the office. We have work to do. He nodded, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. Yes, CEO Green, we certainly do. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I realized the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely rewritten. I was no longer the girl in the back of the church. I was the woman at the head of the table. And the man beside me, the one they had mocked, was the only family I had left. The war wasn't over. The criminal trials were just beginning. But the siege was broken. I took a deep breath of the city air. For the first time in my life, it didn't smell like exhaust and pressure. It smelled like the ocean. It smelled like a fresh start. The victory in the courtroom should have been the end of the war, but I quickly learned that a cornered animal does not simply lie down and die. My mother and Uncle Julian had lost their legal standing, so they turned to the only weapon they had left, which was scorched earth. The smear campaign began 48 hours after the verdict. It was not subtle. Tabloids that I had never read before were suddenly publishing exclusive stories from anonymous sources claiming that I was running a cult from the CEO's office. They alleged that Samuel was not a co-founder, but a Svengali figure who had brainwashed me with illicit drugs. One particularly creative article claimed that I was planning to liquidate the entire fleet to fund a commune in Oregon. It was ridiculous, but in the high-stakes world of logistics, perception is reality. Our stock price, which had just begun to recover, wobbled again. Clients started calling, asking nervous questions about leadership stability. But the real threat was not in the papers. It was inside the building. "We are bleeding data," Samuel said 3 days later. He walked into my office without knocking, slapping a folder onto my desk. The manifests for the North Atlantic route were leaked to our competitor, Blue Horizon. Before we even signed the contracts, we lost the bid by exactly 2 cents per ton. That is not a coincidence. I looked at the numbers. He was right. Someone inside the C-suite was feeding information to Julian. My uncle might have been locked out of the bank accounts, but he still had friends in the building, men he had drank scotch with for 20 years. "We have a mole," I said, feeling a cold knot of anger in my stomach. "We do," Samuel agreed, "and we need to find them before they sink the Asian expansion deal." I reverted to my training. I was not a politician, but I was a risk analyst. I knew how to stress test a system to find the weak point. "We are going to run a canary trap," I told Samuel. "I will distribute 3 different versions of the Asian expansion strategy to the 3 vice presidents I suspect. Each version will have a unique, slightly erroneous detail regarding the projected fuel costs. Then we wait to see which fake number ends up in Julian's hands." It took less than 24 hours. The next morning, a blog known for being Julian's unofficial mouthpiece published a scathing piece about how the new CEO was underestimating fuel costs by exactly 12%. I knew who had the file with the 12% error. It was Marcus Thorne, the vice president of operations. He was a man who had attended my christening. He had smiled at me in the hallways for 10 years. I called an emergency all-hands meeting in the main atrium. I wanted witnesses. I wanted everyone to see that the rot was being cut out. Thorne stood near the front, looking confident, chatting with the CFO. He didn't know that I had already cut his network access. I walked to the podium. The chatter died down. "This company," I began, my voice echoing in the vast glass space, "was built on the principle of reliability. When we make a promise, we keep it. But recently, promises have been broken. Confidential data has been sold to our competitors to devalue our stock." I saw Thorne shift his weight. He looked at his phone, likely realizing his email wasn't refreshing. "Marcus Thorne," I said. He looked up, startled. The entire room turned to face him. "Please come forward," I said. "Evelyn," he said, forcing a laugh. "What is this?" I said come forward. He walked to the base of the stage, his smile faltering. "Did you or did you not send the confidential Asian market strategy to a private email address belonging to Julian Green at 3 a.m. yesterday?" I asked. "That is absurd," Thorne sputtered. "I would never—" "Do not lie to me, Marcus," I cut him off. "We have the server logs, we have the metadata, and we have the specific false data point that I planted in your file, which appeared on my uncle's favorite financial blog this morning." A gasp went through the crowd. Thorne turned pale. "Julian promised you a seat on his new board, didn't he?" I asked, my voice cold. "He told you that if you helped him crash the stock, he would buy it back cheap, oust me, and make you sue. He lied to you, Marcus, just like he lied to the shareholders." "You are ruining this company," Thorne shouted. dropping the mask. "You are a child. Julian is the rightful heir." "Julian is a criminal subject to a grand jury investigation," I said. "And as of this moment, you are terminated for cause. Security is waiting to escort you out. Your severance is 0. 2 guards stepped forward. Thorne looked around for support, but the faces of his colleagues were stony. No one wanted to be associated with a traitor. As he was led away, shouting obscenities, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't fear, it was respect. I looked at the sea of employees. Anyone else who is confused about where their loyalty should lie is welcome to leave now. But if you stay, you work for this company, not for a ghost. No one moved. By the end of the week, the tide had turned completely. The shareholders, seeing the decisive action, rallied. The stock climbed 7%, stabilizing at a 5-year high. The message was clear. The Green Empire was under new management, and the management was not playing games. My family was running out of ammunition. With Thorne gone, their flow of inside information was severed. Their bank accounts were frozen by the court order. The allies who had supported them, the country club friends, the politicians, were suddenly returning my calls and ignoring theirs. Power in New York is fluid, and it flows toward the winner. I sat in my office late on Friday night. The city lights were twinkling below. Samuel was sitting on the sofa, reviewing the new security protocols. "They are quiet," I said. "Too quiet." "They are desperate," Samuel replied. "They have lost the legal battle. They have lost the public opinion war. They have lost their inside man. A desperate enemy is the most dangerous kind. Evelyn." "What do they have left?" I asked. "Nothing legitimate," Samuel said, "which means they will try something illegitimate. We need to be ready for the final desperation play." My phone buzzed. It was a text from a blocked number. "You think you have won. You have no idea what is coming." I showed it to Samuel. He read it, his expression darkening. "Arthur warned me about this part," Samuel said softly. "He said that when the money was gone, the masks would come off completely. We are about to see who your family really is." "I am ready," I said, and I realized with a start that I actually was. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I had taken back my name. I had taken back my company. Now, I just had to survive the finale. "Get the car," I told Samuel. "We are going to the old estate. If they are going to try something, they will do it where they feel strongest." "That is dangerous," Samuel warned. "It is necessary," I said. "It ends tonight." The drive to the Green Estate was silent. The rain had returned, turning the winding roads of the Hudson Valley into slick ribbons of black glass. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, while Samuel sat in the passenger seat, holding a thick black envelope on his lap. He had not let go of it since we left the city. When we pulled up to the main house, the lights were blazing. My mother and Uncle Julian were not hiding in the shadows. They were waiting in the main library, the very room where Arthur Green had built his empire. They had broken the seal on grandfather's oldest scotch, and the crystal decanter sat empty on the desk. They looked up as we entered. Julian's tie was undone, and his eyes were bloodshot. My mother looked brittle, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together. "You came," Julian slurred slightly, gesturing with his glass. "The prodigal granddaughter returns to the scene of the crime." "The only crime here, Julian," I said, standing in the doorway, "is the one you are about to be indicted for." "Indictments," Julian laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Lawyers can fix indictments. We have leverage. Evelyn, we know things about the company that you don't. You think you can fire Thorne and it ends? We built the network. If we go down, we take the whole fleet with us." "They are bluffing," Samuel said calmly. He stepped into the light. "You," my mother spat, looking at Samuel with pure venom, "you are the cause of all this. You poisoned my father against us." "Your father did not need poisoning. Beatrice," Samuel said. "He had eyes. He watched you for years." Samuel walked over to the heavy oak desk and placed the black envelope in the center. The sound of the paper hitting the wood echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "What is this?" Julian asked, eyeing the envelope warily. "This," Samuel said, "is the trap." Julian reached for it, but his hand shook. He pulled out a single document, bound in red thread. "Arthur knew about the consulting fees," Samuel explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "He knew about the Cayman accounts. He let you steal that money. He called it the allowance of the greedy. He wanted to see if $15 million was enough to satisfy you." I looked at Samuel, shocked. Grandfather knew? He had let them steal? "But it wasn't enough," Samuel continued. "Arthur predicted that once he was gone, you would try to sell the engine, the core IP, the routing algorithm." Julian went pale. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. "You tried to sell the proprietary code to Blue Horizon yesterday," Samuel stated. "We have the wiretap logs from your burner phone. Julian, we have the draft contract you sent to their CEO. You offered to sell the legacy of this family for $50 million. I didn't sign it," Julian stammered. "It was just a discussion." "The will anticipates the discussion," Samuel said. "Read Clause 9, subsection C." I walked over and looked at the document. It was a conditional clause that I had never seen before. It was sealed, only to be opened by the strategic overseer in the event of an attempted sale of intellectual property. If any direct beneficiary attempts to sell, transfer, or compromise the proprietary technology of green shipping to a competitor, their status as a beneficiary is immediately revoked ab initio, from the beginning. Furthermore, said beneficiary assumes personal liability for the entire valuation of the compromised asset. I looked up, my mind reeling at the legal brutality of it. The algorithm was valued at $4 billion. "Do you understand what this means?" I asked, looking at my mother and uncle. "It means you don't just lose the inheritance. You don't just lose the stipend. You owe the estate $4 billion. "That is impossible," Mother whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. We will be destitute. They will take everything, my house, my jewelry, everything." "Arthur gave you a choice," Samuel said softly. "He gave you a stipend of $50,000 a month. All you had to do was be content. All you had to do was not sell his life's work to his enemies. You failed the test." "He set us up!" Julian screamed, lunging across the desk. "The old bastard set us up!" Samuel didn't flinch. He protected the company from parasites, and he was right to do so. I watched my family crumble. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a sudden, violent structural failure. The reality of their situation hit them like a physical blow. They weren't just cut off. They were ruined. The debt triggered by the clause would allow the estate to seize every personal asset they had acquired over the last 40 years to satisfy the liability. They would be left with absolutely nothing, not even the clothes on their backs. "Evelyn," my mother turned to me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She reached out a hand. "Evelyn, please, you are the CEO. You can waive the clause. You can stop this. We are your blood." I looked at her hand. I remembered how that hand had pushed me away at the funeral. I remembered how it had pointed at Samuel and called him filth. I remembered the years of cold looks and whispered insults. "I can't," I said. "The clause is automatic. It was triggered the moment Julian sent that email." "You can fight it," she pleaded. "You have the power." "I have the power because I earned it," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and finality. "And I will not use it to save people who tried to destroy the very thing I am sworn to protect." "We will die on the street," Julian roared. "Then you will finally understand what it feels like," Samuel said. "Perhaps it will build character." He turned to me. "It is done, Evelyn. The legal team has already been notified. The assets are being frozen as we speak. The police are on their way to collect them for the fraud charges, and the bankruptcy lawyers will handle the rest." I looked at my family one last time. They looked small. The grandeur of the room, the portraits of ancestors on the walls, only served to highlight their pettiness. They were not titans. They were just thieves who had been caught. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. "Goodbye, Uncle Julian." I turned and walked out of the library. I heard my mother screaming my name, but I didn't stop. I walked out into the cool night air, the rain hitting my face, washing away the suffocation of that house. Samuel followed me. We stood by the car, the silence of the estate heavy around us. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "It hurts. They are my family." "It is the pain of removing a gangrenous limb," Samuel said. "It hurts, but it saves the life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of old, tarnished keys. "What are those?" I asked. "The keys to the archive," Samuel said. "My role as overseer was tied to the execution of the will. The trap has been sprung. The company is safe. The parasites are removed. My duty to Arthur is complete." He placed the keys in my hand. They felt heavy, cold, and ancient. "You are leaving?" I asked, a sudden panic rising in my chest. "You can't leave. I need you. You are my partner." "You don't need a partner anymore, Evelyn," Samuel said, looking at me with pride. "You needed someone to help you clear the wreckage. The wreckage is gone. Now you need to build. And I am a man of the past. You are the future. Where will you go?" "There are other docks," he said with a faint smile. "Other currents. I have been in one place for too long." "Samuel," I said, gripping his arm, "you are not homeless anymore. You have 49% of the company. You are a billionaire." "Money is just numbers on a screen," he said. "Arthur knew I would never spend it. Use my share, Evelyn. Use it to fix the things we broke back in the 80s. Use it to make the company human again." He patted my hand gently, then stepped back. "You are a green," he said. "The real kind. Arthur would have been so happy to see you tonight." I watched him walk away down the long driveway, disappearing into the mist and the rain. He walked with the same shuffle I had seen in the church, but now I knew it wasn't weakness. It was the walk of a man who carried the world in his head and chose to walk softly upon it. I stood alone in the rain, holding the keys to the kingdom. My family was destroyed. My heart was bruised. But as I looked up at the dark sky, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm had passed. The ship was battered, but it was still afloat, and for the first time, I was the one steering it. 6 weeks after the confrontation at the estate, the final act of my grandfather's legal drama played out not in a courtroom, but in the quiet, sterile silence of Harrison Sterling's private office. The storm outside had passed, replaced by a crisp, cold autumn morning that made the city look sharp and unforgiving. My mother and Uncle Julian sat across from me. The transformation was absolute. The arrogance that had defined them for decades had evaporated, leaving behind two frightened, diminished figures. Julian was wearing a suit that looked slightly too large for him, as if he had shrunk inside it. My mother, stripped of her designers and her jewelry by the asset freeze, wore a simple gray dress. Her hands, usually perfectly manicured, were twisting a tissue into shreds. "Evelyn," my mother said, her voice cracking. It was the first time she had spoken my name without a sneer in years. "Please, we are willing to sign anything. We will step down from the board. We will sign non-disclosure agreements. We need something to live on. The lawyers say we will lose the apartments by the end of the month." "We are family," Julian added, though he couldn't look me in the eye. "Doesn't that count for anything? Arthur wouldn't have wanted us on the street. He was trying to teach us a lesson, not execute us." I looked at them, and I waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the urge to scream at them, to list every insult, every slight, every moment they had made me feel small. But the anger didn't come. In its place was a profound, hollow pity. They were not monsters. They were just small, greedy children who had never been told no until it was too late. "Grandfather did not want you on the street," I said quietly. "That is why he gave you the stipend. That is why he gave you the houses. You are the ones who gambled it all on a betrayal he expressly forbade. We made a mistake, Julian pleaded. A desperate mistake. And now you are facing the consequence, I said. I turned to Sterling. Read the final codicil. Harrison. Sterling adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. This was the document Samuel had alluded to. The final failsafe that activated only when the forfeiture clause was triggered. In the event that the primary beneficiaries are disqualified due to a breach of the integrity clause, Sterling read, his voice steady, the entirety of their forfeited assets, including the real estate holdings in Aspen and the Hamptons, as well as the accumulated value of the trust, shall be liquidated immediately. My mother held her breath, a flicker of hope in her eyes. She thought perhaps the money would go back to the company, where I could quietly funnel some of it back to them. The proceeds of said liquidation, Sterling continued, shall be transferred in full to the newly established Arthur Green Memorial Fund. A charity? Julian whispered, horrified. Specifically, Sterling looked up, a ghost of a smile on his lips. A charitable trust dedicated to providing housing, legal aid, and vocational training for the elderly homeless population of New York City. The silence that followed was deafening. The irony hung in the room like a heavy curtain. The fortune they had tried to protect from a dirty old man in a church was now going to be used to save men exactly like him. You can't, my mother gasped. That is millions of dollars for tramps? For human beings, I corrected her. People who have fallen on hard times. People like Samuel. Is Samuel enjoying this? Julian spat, a flash of his old malice returning. Is he laughing at us from his new yacht? Samuel is gone, I said. It was true. Samuel had not been seen since that night in the rain. He had not claimed his office. He had not touched the billions of dollars in stock that stood in his name. He had simply signed a proxy agreement giving me voting rights for his shares and vanished back into the anonymity he preferred. He didn't want the money. He just wanted the correction. This is the end of the road, I told them. The transfer is automatic. The deed to the Hamptons house was signed over to the charity this morning. You have 30 days to vacate. Evelyn, my mother stood up, reaching for me. You cannot do this. I am your mother. I know, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. And because you are my mother, I have arranged for a small, personal allowance from my own salary to be sent to you. It is enough for a small apartment in Queens and groceries. It is enough to survive. But it is not enough to rule. I walked to the door. Do not come to the office again. Security has your photos. I walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clean. The next few months were a blur of reconstruction. Without the toxic weight of my family, Green strategies flourished. I rebranded the company, stripping away the gilded excess of the past and focusing on efficiency and transparency. We instituted a profit-sharing model for the dock workers. We patched the holes in the safety regulations. We became the company Arthur Green had always claimed we were. But the most meaningful work happened quietly. On a cold Tuesday in November, I stood in front of a renovated brick building in the Lower East Side. It had been a derelict warehouse, but now, thanks to the liquidated assets of the Green estate, it was the Reed Green Center for Housing and Dignity. I walked through the halls. They were warm and smelled of fresh paint and coffee. I saw men and women who looked like Samuel, people worn down by the grinding gears of the city, sitting in comfortable chairs, reading, talking, feeling safe. I didn't give a speech. I didn't cut a ribbon. I just watched. Later that night, I sat in the CEO's office. It was late, and the building was quiet. I had removed the heavy velvet curtains my mother had installed and let the city lights flood the room. On the desk, in a simple wooden frame, was a photo of my grandfather. He was younger in the picture, standing on a dock, windblown and smiling. I thought about Samuel. I wondered where he was. I wondered if he was sleeping on a bench, or if he had found a small room somewhere. I hoped he knew what he had done. He hadn't just saved a company. He had saved a soul. Mine. I picked up the photo and ran my thumb over the glass. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was clarity. "You didn't leave money to make me rich," I whispered to the man in the photo, my voice trembling slightly in the empty room. "You left the truth to set me free." And for the first time in 28 years, I finally was. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Evelyn's journey resonates with you as much as it did with me. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.